For the record, this is not something I'm that annoyed about. I just thought this would be the best place to post this. So my players, party of 4, D&D 5th edition, 9th level, defeat a Rakshasa. They decide to loot his room, and as a joke, I tell them that his bookshelf is mostly smutty fiction. The players are abused by this and decide to take 12 of the books with them. Now, I just said they were erotica as like a offhand joke, not anticipating for my players to want to read them and sell them on the black market in a dictatorship regime. So, I spent a good 20 minutes of play writing the titles and plots of fantasy erotica novels on the spot. This was, in retrospect, hilarious, but not as serious of a horror story as others here, but it certainly mortified me in the moment. Thankfully, I have never been in this situation, as I've gone out of my way to avoid it. Not everyone can Matt Mercer a tusk glove out of completely nowhere. However, this DM came up with 12 of those things in 20 minutes. You know what? Even though this guy said it was mortifying, I have to say, I respect it. I definitely respect it. Got bored after today's D&D session and wanted to jump on the TV with my party, but then I remembered that Netflix doesn't have half the stuff we like. Group was pretty bummed about it, honestly. Almost ruined the hangout. Luckily, I had Atlas VPN. Atlas VPN is the sponsor of today's video. They are the best VPN deal on the market with affordable online protection for just $1.70 per month with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Using this, you can get rid of that pesky region lock and unlock content from all across the world. Want to watch Friends on Netflix? Well, unfortunately, in America, that's not possible. But with the power of Atlas VPN, it's as simple as flicking a switch and boom, there you go. On top of that, Atlas VPN is an investment in your own privacy and security. If you're looking for something on Google, with Atlas VPN, you can search the web with real and organic search results and do it without tracking your activity. Atlas also serves as a really good way to block those ads and malware. Best for me, it works across unlimited devices. I hate having multiple subscriptions for multiple different devices. With Atlas VPN, it protects all your devices with a single $1.70 subscription. If you want a private holiday season and New Year, then head down into the description down below where you can pick up Atlas VPN Premium for $1.70 per month, as well as getting 6 months free with a 30-day money-back guarantee. There's literally no losing with this deal. Grab it right now while the holidays are still in season. Thank you so much to Atlas VPN for sponsoring today's video. As always, supporting our sponsors does support us. Without further ado, I'm going to turn back into an animated rat so we can get back to the video. There is a key recommendation to upcoming DMs that I think a lot of people misinterpret. The suggestion to learn to improvise is a great one because, as all DMs will know, your party will eventually surprise you and venture in a direction you did not expect. This is advice that any DM should follow, or they're forced to relegate to the railroad when the party takes the alternative route. But some people think you should only improvise and make bare bones preparations, and maybe there are some really good DMs out there that have the ability to do that. But for most people, prep is absolutely key to making a good game, and here is why. I joined a homebrew game about an empire that was going through political turmoil and losing foreign wars, greatly weakening it. It sounded very similar to my own game, so I joined up. I decided to play an Inquisitor-type character, trying to strengthen the empire by any means necessary. If the other players happened to want to rebel, then my character could be flexible enough to think a new revolution was necessary. We start the session off with the other two party members, Ranger and Bard, hanging around a tavern as I come to investigate a town. Bartender tells us bandits have been raiding the town and the local magistrate is looking for volunteers. Cool. The other party members hear this and, low on coin, decide to join up with me. After about an hour of talking and introductions, we decide to make our way to the magistrate, when suddenly a nearby man grabs my character's hand and tells me to play a card game with him. My character refuses. He's here on business. The man, well, he is insistent. We refuse thrice and he still won't relent, causing my character to glare at him and ask if he's interfering with Inquisitor business. The DM asks me for an intimidation roll, and after a success, he finally leaves us alone. We attempt to leave the bar only to be stopped by the waitress. The waitress starts talking about how cool and powerful the party looks and starts blogging about her own life out of nowhere. We talk and try to leave, only for her to offer services for gold. We refuse, but she is insistent, and we again have to refuse several times before she finally backs off. but before we can, the ranger has to make a con save for the ale he drank 30 minutes ago. And when he fails, he goes unconscious, and we have to spend the next 10 minutes trying to wake him up. As we make our way to the magistrate, a random man on a horse suddenly attacks us. Ranger shoots him and knocks him off his horse. Bard heals him up, and we demand answers for why he attacked us. The man is very nonchalant in his attitude, refusing to answer even under the threat of sword. After asking him multiple times and threatening him, he finally answers that he's part of some noble house, and he thought we were from a rival house. My character is incensed, asking why he would think totally random strangers he just saw were from a rival house, and the man just shrugs, going on and on about how he hates the rival house. I almost execute the man right there, only for us to be attacked again by another horseman. The DM telling us this time it's a man from a rival house. The bard casts dissonant whispers on the horse, and we tell the DM flatly we just run away because we don't want to deal with this. We finally make it to the magistrate, only for the guard in front to ask who each of us are, and we need to give our background stories that we had already said back at the tavern. As the clock finally hits the 4th hour of session time, the DM starts clapping his hands and goes, "Perfect! The next session went exactly 3 hours as I wanted. See you next week, folks!" And if it wasn't obvious by now, the DM was throwing every single thing he could think of to prevent us from actually meeting the magistrate. He was throwing every single thing to eat up the session time as much as possible. Pretty annoying, but maybe he just didn't have enough time? The next week is exactly the same. The magistrate greets us and tells us we have to see a lieutenant at the other side of town for details on the bandits. We just spent 3 hours getting to this guy, and he tells us that we have to go see someone else. The bard asks why in the world he wouldn't have the information on the bandits, and the magistrate shrugs and says it's not his position to know military affairs. So, we go off to meet this lieutenant, only for a friggin' storm to suddenly appear. The storm is so strong, the rains are so heavy, the winds are so powerful that midway through the town we are forced to rest in a nearby house. In the house is a granny, and we offer her 1 gold piece from each of us after explaining our situation. The granny offers us food. We tell her no thanks since we're already in her home and have rations. When we try to sleep, the granny then requests each of us to start fixing things in her house. Leaky roof, broken cupboard, a rat hanging in the corner. Hey! That's not something that needs fixing. Take offense to that. Anyway, all of which require rolls and more time. An hour is spent in Granny's house before we can finally rest and move on. We meet the lieutenant, who again asks us for our backstories and why we want to help clear the bandits. He finally tells us where the 8 of them are in a nearby forest. We go into the forest only to be stopped by fallen trees blocking our way. All 3 of us have to roll athletics about 5 times to clear the trees, and the DM goes to painstaking descriptions of how our characters' backs hurt and how they feel tired and our hands are itchy if we roll anything below a 10. DM tells us it's been half a day and we need to make camp and long rest again. We decide to forage for food, and then the DM starts listing off every single animal and vegetable he can think of. Bard tells him that he just wants to find vegetables that aren't poisonous, and then he starts listing off the same things again for some reason. Ranger then says he's going to hunt for animals, and again the DM starts listing off every possible animal he can think of in the woods. Ranger has to tell him that he will literally hunt anything, and after a survival check runs across a rabbit. Ranger shoots, and with an 18, and apparently an 18 misses. DM tells him the bushes, shrubs, and forest somehow made Ranger miss with an 18. 18, mind you, is plate armor stats. Ranger then has to continue chasing the rabbit, and the DM just drags the session for another 10 minutes, several of Ranger's shots still missing until he finally lands a 23, which apparently was the magic number he needed to kill this rabbit. Trying to forage this food and cook it takes another hour of session time. We finally get to do the rest. We resume our journey, and the DM says we find the bandit encampment. He starts clapping his hands again and goes, "Wow, guys, another 4-hour session, ending right on time. This is going really well if I do say so myself. Okay, next week I'll get those bandit stats and find a map somewhere online for the battle." Yeah, I was done. I quit this game. I perfectly understand that TTRPGs aren't just finding a quest and doing a combat session, but when it takes 8 hours of forced interactions to finally just arrive at the bandits we were supposed to fight, but things are being dragged out not for the sake of enriching the world, but eating up time, and random weather and falling trees impede the path just for the planned session time, the game loses authenticity. Please, people, a good game has both preparation and improvisation. Look, guys, I'm a DM too, and I understand that sometimes it can be really hard to gauge how much prep you've done and how long the session you have prepped will be. However, you shouldn't be this off the mark. The number one thing you need to do as a DM is engage your players and make sure that they are having fun. Otherwise, there's literally no reason for them to be there at all. While cleaning Granny's house and jumping over trees might be someone's definition of fun, it's definitely not most D&D players' definition of fun. Also, it's important to note that this was the first impression of this group, and not a good first impression. Those first few sessions establish what kind of campaign you're going to be running. I usually do a combat encounter early because combat is a big part of a lot of my games, and I want the players to understand that early on. So I tell them that at session 0, but I also show them that at session 1. Here, the players are just seeing a bunch of boring chores and stalling for the DM because, seemingly, they have no idea how to prep their own game. Hey, do you think you could fill up a slot in my party? We were almost ready to start, but somebody had to drop out. It was about 2 years ago, and Ransom, who I had sometimes played the FFG Star Wars RPG with, had just hit me up on Discord. He needed one more person to play in an Imperial-themed campaign taking place during the original trilogy of Star Wars movies, where we would be agents of the Empire. I love playing evil campaigns, I can tolerate Star Wars, and had previously played in games GM'd by this guy. The games were enjoyable and well run. Hell yeah, I said, just give me a date and a time, anything I should know up front for character creation. You guys are going to betray the Empire, he explained. It'll be one of those things where you start off as Imperial agents, but then you grow discontent with all the awful things they do, and so you turn against the Empire, and then you become heroes. When the day of session 1 arrived, I showed up with my character, an Imperial engineer who was uncomfortable with the brutal suppression of local non-humans. Then the other players began to show up. Most of them were people I knew. Some of them were friends, and one guy, Vaughn, was a total stranger, but we hit it off well. Then we started talking about our characters, and we waited for Ransom to get on the voice chat, and something became immediately evident. I was the only person that Ransom had told about his intended defector storyline. All of the others were hardcore Imperial partisans, including a literal propagandist, a specialized assassin droid owned by a Moff, etc. My buddy Aziz was playing an Inquisitor who had been rescued from child slavery by Darth Vader and basically worshipped him as a result. Vaughn had brought a Hutt commando toting the Star Wars equivalent of a minigun who had joined to pay off clan debts. When asked why his character wouldn't have been kicked out by the notoriously racist Empire, he said, "You're welcome to give it a try." And after a glance at his character sheet, it was decided that nobody was going to take him up on that. What followed was the first and last session of that campaign, despite some great narration by Ransom that emphasized how unjust the situation on this planet was and the awful system that we were a part of. There was no dissuading our band of Imperials. We went from scene to scene, cozying up to the planetary authorities, proclaiming the glory of the Emperor, and repelling a guerrilla attack on the governor's mansion. Out into the city, we were chased by guerrillas, fighting a series of skirmishes, until at last they fled into the dense, cramped tunnels of the Undercity and began to disappear into a little community of civilians that lived there. Although most of us were ready to give up on the chase, Aziz went full Inquisitor. "If these sniveling aliens allow the rebel scum to hide among them," he announced in character, "then they will suffer the consequences of the rebels' actions. We will make an example of them." Maybe I could get this thing back on track and save Ransom from his own miscommunication. "Wait," I say, also in character, "you don't mean killing these people, do you? You can't tell the rebels apart. There are children in there." "I choke him," said Aziz. "I choke him. I choke OP with the Force for questioning me." This probably seems like a dick move because you're reading it rather than experiencing it, but it was all in good fun. We were all laughing, myself included. Even Ransom, frustrated though he was, seemed amused at how quickly this had escalated. So, I'm on voice chat, role-playing being strangled with the Force, and Vaughn steps up and goes, "I'm not being paid enough to go into those tunnels and get in a shootout. You know what those rebels are capable of, and they know this place better than we do. No way I'm gonna risk my hide for the Empire." For a second, I thought this would be the turning point. Aziz the Inquisitor would have a much harder time choking Vaughn the Hutt than me, and with his charisma and persuasive heavy weaponry, this Hutt might be able to intimidate the rest of the group into abandoning the mission, at least for now. Maybe, I thought, despite the ridiculous road it took for us to get here, Ransom is about to get what he wants. Then, Vaughn unslung an enormous flame projector. "That's why I have this!" Alright, at this point, with most of us practically in tears from laughter, Ransom finally decides to cut bait and stop the game. "Okay, first of all, guys, we're not doing a scene where you massacre civilians with a flamethrower," he said, which is a hell of a sentence out of context. Then, at last, he explained what his intentions with the scenario had been. Everyone, especially Ransom the DM himself, was embarrassed by what had happened, but there were no, hard feelings. We agreed to scale the campaign and chalk it up as a lesson learned from poor communication leading to war crimes. I think this is a good lesson for all game masters, not just about the communication thing, which is important, but also in assuming what players are going to do. Look, there are absolutely times where you are going to accurately predict a player's actions. But at the same time, there are also plenty of times where players are going to do things that you don't expect. That's the beauty of playing with other human beings that can make their own decisions. Here, the DM thought, obviously the players are going to realize why this is wrong and abandon this quest. But that's not what the players did, completely out of their vision. This definitely could have been stopped with some Session Zero communication. If you intended for a betray the Empire route, tell the players that and they can make characters that will fit that. If you don't tell them about it though, well, some problems are going to arise, as we see here. However, seeing this group move past this and learn from their mistake, that's awesome. That's exactly what you should do, and I think all of us could learn from this. I'm using a throwaway. They know my main. I'll try to keep this short, as really, I'm just venting. It all started with a Pathfinder game. We were a group of friends IRL who played together online. I was running, and at first, everything was fine. Then our problem player suddenly started exhibiting some annoying behaviors. They'd split the party as much as possible and just wander off to do their own thing. It was minor, and I figured it'd just take a one-on-one talk to fix it. Well, surprise, that didn't work. Over time, they became worse as a person as well. They became disengaged from the game, they would shoot everyone with passive-aggressive comments, and once got in a shouting match with another player that was really heated and made everyone uncomfortable before I could talk it down. I talked to them a few times, actually. We as a group had agreed we didn't want to lose them as a friend. We all knew that in real life they were going through a rough time, and that it was likely what was leaking into the game. Either way, I got burnt out and needed a break. So, my wife decided to run a Vampire the Masquerade game. Now, World of Darkness games are really not great places to bring unstable people. We should have remembered that. It started out okay, but soon our problem player was back to their old behaviors. This time, whenever it was their turn, they'd say they wanted to do something, but when asked how they do it, they'd demand to be skipped and would talk about it after game. This got old. Fast. Over time, they became more sporadic. Sometimes they would just no-show. Other times, they'd leave the game mid-call during their turns for unknown reasons. It just kept escalating. Eventually, my wife got burnt out too and begged me to take over as Game Master again. So I did, after a lengthy talk with everyone about boundaries and acceptable behavior at the gaming table. It went downhill fast. They came to one session, broke up from the party, and skipped to the end of the dungeon and tried to take on the boss themselves. I had to do some Game Master magic to keep them alive long enough for the party to arrive. I mean, you could just let them die. Just saying. As mad as I was, I didn't want to just murder them if I could help it. Next session, they were all gone, left our server and everything, never said a word. One of my players reached out, and they were told that they were done. So we all had a sigh of relief and continued on. We thought it was over. I was pleased that I didn't have to kick them myself. It wasn't over. The next week, they messaged my wife wanting to know what we knew about them leaving. We said nothing. We didn't know a thing. They didn't like that. My inbox was sorely abused by them over the next few days. Excuses, explanations for their behavior, and begging to be let back in, and accusations of us not caring about them as we didn't come begging for them to come back. In short, I had enough. As politely as I could, I let them know that while I understood their reasons, that didn't excuse their behavior. So I didn't let them back and blocked them. I'm just so done. Last I heard, they were going to run a D&D game for their ex's partner, and some newbies. I wish them luck, but I don't think it's going to end well. Yeah, just based on that description, that's a horror story in itself. But anyway, look, I know I made a joke about killing their character, but the real solution here, unfortunately, is to kick them out of the game. You talked to them multiple times, and they didn't do anything about their behavior. Look, you can explain someone's behavior. You can tell them what they're doing wrong, but you can't make them get better. That is on them. That is their prerogative. They have to improve on their own terms. This person very clearly was not doing that. They were ruining the game for everyone else and were not improving in any way. Look, I understand that you don't want to lose friends, but this person isn't your friend. They understand their behavior is ruining the game. You explained it to them, and they just decide to ignore that. They don't do anything about it, and that is the sign of somebody who is a toxic influence. And then, of course, all of the manipulative crap that came after they left the game, well, that's a warning sign of a person who shouldn't just be kicked out of your game. That's a person that needs to be out of your life. I was not a complete newbie to D&D at this point, but it was the first random group I joined after playing a short campaign with friends. The short campaign with friends fizzled out, and I was hungry for more D&D, so I joined a group on Meetup. They played a library, ages ranging from probably 20 to 50. About 5 guys. I joined in the middle of Lost Mines of Phandelver, which the DM's daughter played in briefly. Looking back, I could see some red flags. It took us way too long to complete this short campaign. It took us close to 7 months, 2 sessions every month, around 2.5 hours each, just to complete Wave Echo Cave. Some players just wanted to screw around, literally tying other PC's shoelaces together and using player characters as literal battering rams for doors. A lot of the time, we wouldn't end up starting until 30 minutes late. And then, when we finally started, the DM was always chowing down on some food he just picked up from somewhere. Most of the time, pizza or Chinese food. So not only did I have to suffer through 30 minutes of nothing, but another 15 minutes of the DM talking with his mouth full of food. But it was my only outlet for D&D, so I kept coming back. After Lost Mines of Phandelver, we switched to Dragon of Icespire Peak, the Essentials Kit. I picked up a monk and rolled a really good starting state. Our party was Sorcerer, Wizard, Druid, and I as the monk. The DM decided to throw a DMPC into the mix, I think a Dragonborn Paladin. I didn't mind because it meant my monk wasn't the only one on the front lines, because the Druid tended to play more of like a caster. Our party's first night at an inn together, we're all drinking and getting to know each other after a fight. The DMPC decided to pick up a girl and bring her up to his room. Okay, cool. Thought it was so that we as the party could be not outshined by the DMPC and we could just do our own thing. Eventually, we all sleep in our rooms upstairs. And that's when it started. The whole party could hear the wonderful sounds of the DMPC and his friend going at it nearby. The DM had us all roll perception checks, and if we rolled high enough, we had a level of exhaustion the next day because we couldn't sleep. Being a monk with high wisdom and perception, naturally I was most likely to fail. And I did. Okay, so the DM has fun, some of us got exhaustion, and some of the adventure was a little tougher the next day. I bet he felt real accomplished after that. Sometime during this, the pandemic started, and that's when it started to get worse. We switched online to Roll20, and you'd think people would have more time to get their crap together and be ready to play on time. But no, we kept starting later and later. The DM was always late, sometimes 45 minutes late. He would text us 15 minutes after we're supposed to start and let us know he was going to be late. He had to cook dinner. This happened constantly. What's more is that the DM was always eating in the background of the session, and what used to be across the room was now disgusting sounds right chewing in your ear. To pour it on even more, the DMPC kept doing his thing with the girls every chance he got. I kept rolling a high perception and kept getting more exhausted. I was good with the rules, I knew what each level did, but when I rolled for ability checks that should have been disadvantaged, I never did because screw that. The DM never called me out on it, so I just kept rolling normally. Eventually I got fed up. I could no longer sit around for an hour screwing around waiting to play D&D just to have a crappy time, so I quit that group. Luckily by that time I joined a group that I liked a lot better. I also started DMing my own group, so I had enough D&D to go around without the library group. Oh, and I forgot to mention that a few sessions into the campaign, we had another person join the group who was a fighter, mostly a tank, so we had no need for the DMPC anymore because that role was filled. But the story of the DMPC doesn't end so quickly. He stayed on for the whole campaign, at least up until I left the group. I don't know what happened after. Oof, we've seen some DMPC horror stories, but nothing like this, mostly because I never thought somebody would actually do this to their group, but yeah, there's that. This is actually something we can kind of learn from. While most DMs are not going to inadvertently nerf players with loud sexual activities, A lot of DMs will inadvertently nerf players even by accident, or even on purpose with in-game stuff such as anti-magic fields everywhere nerfing all spellcasters, or every enemy having super high constitution so that every time the monk uses stunning strike, the enemy just so happens to succeed. Here we see a monk who is struggling to sleep because they have high wisdom. The DM has nerfed their character. They're basically constantly under the effects of exhaustion. While I think the vast majority of you are not going to nerf your player characters using this method, a lot of us do this on accident. And it's important to keep in mind that when a player is inadvertently nerfed or bashed down by some sort of effect in the game, it really sucks. It really hurts. And keeping an eye on that while you're DMing, that's important. Alright, and that's going to be it for today's episode of RPG Horror Stories. Thank you so much to Atlas VPN for sponsoring today's video, and thank you to you all for watching. If you guys enjoyed, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of my content, then you can check out our Tavern Adjacent podcast, where we talk all things TTRPGs, D&D, and more, while answering your horror stories and questions. So if you're interested, head into the cards, and while you're there, subscribe to Crispy's Tavern to get more of our content as it comes out. And finally, if you want to leave your own stories or thoughts, go down to the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment gaslight to let me know you made it to the end of the video. In essence, like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.